Just to make sure.
Testing.
I think so.
I'll push one time, turn it green.
Here we go.
Awesome.
Thank you. I just.
Welcome everyone to Batten Hour. I hope you had a fantastic weekend. My name is Amanda Crombie. I am our Assistant Dean for Academic Programs. I have the distinct pleasure of welcoming you to Batten Hour this semester. Batten Hours are always on Mondays at 12:30, so please come back. But today, I also get the opportunity to remind you about the Batten Wellness Week that is happening this week. If you have any questions or information, there's a lovely flyer in the back. You can get more information about our wellness opportunities for the semester or for the week. And then today, also at 1:45, I have a few more spots for a private lunch this afternoon with our guests. Please see Sean if you have any interest at 1:45 and availability. I know class schedules are tight. So thank you for being here today. Without further ado, I have the wonderful pleasure of welcoming our Dean, Ian Solomon, to the stage for a brief conversation and then some question and answer with Anne-Marie Slaughter. My fault. Thank you. I caught it. You said it. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Crombie. Hello, everybody. Welcome. Welcome. I see a few new faces. So welcome to Garrett Hall and the Great Hall of Garrett Hall. You'll see the beautiful ceiling here, one of the best ceilings at UVA. This is a McKim Mead and White building that was finished in 1908 and originally known as the Commons. So welcome to the Commons and welcome to the Batten School of Leadership and Public Policy. And please join me in welcoming Anne-Marie Slaughter, who will join us in conversation. You can applaud again for her. It really is a privilege to have her here and engage her in conversation. And I'm sure you'll agree with me. I had a chance to spend some time with Dr. Slaughter on Friday evening at St. Anne's Belfield School, where my son is a graduate, I'm on the board, and she is an illustrious graduate. We were going and looking at the awards that STAB gives its seniors and just finding her name on the wall back when she was a student. I won't tell you exactly when. But a Charlottesville native coming back for a visit now and still has family here, but it's a really terrific career that I think pieces of it will interest many people here. 7 years as Dean of Princeton School of Public and International Affairs, formerly known as the Woodrow Wilson School. Where we first met was when she was the director of policy planning at the State Department under Secretary Clinton. The first 2 years of the Obama administration, really trying to chart out new thoughts. So there are things happening in the world of foreign affairs and foreign aid today, and perhaps she'll have some perspectives on that to share. She's a very well-respected international lawyer, former president of the American Society of International Law, and spent about a decade on the faculties at Harvard Law School and University of Chicago Law School, and is currently the CEO of one of the, I think, most innovative, creative think tanks, New America. And I will ask her to talk a little bit about that so I don't get any of those facts wrong. But deeply thoughtful on international law, global affairs in a networked world, gender equality and work and family policy, and the role of values in leadership, values of courage, resilience, leadership, honesty. So welcome back to Charlottesville, Anne-Marie. And maybe just start with you grew up here, you went to Princeton undergrad, Harvard for law school, got your PhD at Oxford. What's it like to come home? What changes stand out for you when you come back to Charlottesville?
So Ian, thank you. And it's really a delight to be here and to be in this room and in this school, which of course did not exist when I was growing up here. My father and uncle both went to the law school, and my father did some teaching at the law school. I want to clear up one thing right away. There are two buildings, at least on the grounds, that bear the name Slaughter. One was donated by very wealthy Slaughters who are not us at the law school. The other is Slaughter Reck, who is my grandfather, who was an All-American football player for Michigan, then a line coach at NC State, and then a line coach here, and then ran intramurals. When I became an academic, everybody would say, oh, well, yeah, you grew up in Virginia, you must be the child of academics. And I'd be, no, I'm the person who didn't get any of those athletic genes and stayed in school for a long time. So reasonably deep roots in Charlottesville. My grandfather moved here in that family in 1933. So I come back, well, and of course come back regularly. My parents still live here, my brother, my sister-in-law, and my nieces and nephews. I think really, I wouldn't have always known how to say this, but I can say it now. The UVA has become a fully national and international university. And when I was growing up, it was the university. It was Mr. Jefferson's university. It was, not just the pride of Virginia, but also there was UNC and Duke and Vanderbilt and UVA. There were a group of schools, and they were extremely good schools, but they were still state or regional schools. And that's just not true anymore in all the schools. You can see that in the expansion of the grounds. You can see that in the expansion of the ambition of the university, in the diversity of the students, and the diversity in every way, including geographic. So that's really when I come home, and I live in Princeton, so I'm still living in a university town, I'm just really struck by the sense that the university and indeed Charlottesville are certainly national and increasingly global in their orientation and the people who come here.
Fantastic. Thank you. We're living in interesting times. You have rich experience in policy and geopolitics and policy making, politics generally. And this is a moment where it's challenging sometimes even to keep up with the headlines of what's happening. Lots of sound and fury, hard to tell signal from noise, but there are certainly some decisions with potentially very serious consequences. Help us interpret this moment if you can. Maybe start for American families and American institutions and American values. Help us interpret what's happening as you see it.
So this is a moment when all of us who aspire to be public servants, to aspire to be leaders in your community, in your institutions, in the nation or the world, I think have a particular responsibility in how we interpret and how we react. So I will start by saying that I think much of what the president is doing, both in terms of how we're treating other nations and certainly in terms of just ending foreign aid, although I expect that it will come back, but it's going to take quite some time, is very detrimental to U.S. interests. I think if you want to compete with China, foreign aid is a much better way to do that than straight out military and tech competition. I also think that if I were Xi Jinping, I'd be dancing a jig because we are sort of unilaterally disarming in Africa and Latin America and places where we are competing, and we compete through our businesses, but we also compete with a lot of U.S. government programs. And I'm a Democrat, and you can expect that, I've written widely on sort of what I think, how the United States should act in the world, and it's not this way. I also think that it is really important not to be only reflexively negative if you are on one side or the other. I am very worried about our inability to talk across political lines in any way. I really think that is the greatest danger we face right now as a country. And I'm going to give you an example. Secretary Clinton well, Madeleine Albright, when she was Secretary of State, wanted to fold USAID into the State Department. And she didn't succeed. She folded USIA, the U.S. Information Agency, and ACTA, the Agency for Arms Control, or the Arms Control and Development Agency. They were separate agencies, and she folded them into the State Department, which is Secretary of State, and she wanted to do that with USAID. And Congress said no, and that's actually in the statute. And so I think as this gets challenged legally, President Trump will not be able to just do this. But Secretary Clinton felt, and many people have felt, I didn't agree, that this, very similar to what President Trump is saying, which is American dollars need to be spent more consistently with American interests. Point one. That was her argument too. In both Australia and Britain, they had a separate global development department, which I've actually written about. I thought USAID should become a separate department of global government at the cabinet level. In both Australia and Britain, that experiment failed, and the separate agency of development was folded back into the Foreign and Commonwealth Office in Britain and what's called DFAT, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade in Australia. So when I say I think we have a responsibility, I'm not going to not object. I'm drafting an op-ed in my head. But neither am I going to automatically say the how, I think, is very bad. The what, I'm not so sure. And I have called publicly for completely overhauling the State Department. Right now, if you speak 3 languages and spend your life traveling around the world, and at 45 or 40 or 35, you want to become a Foreign Service officer, you will be knocked back to stamping visas for 2 years. And if you go in as a Foreign Service officer, you're going to spend 30 years being promoted in the sort of stair-step way we have always done. That institution was created in 1925. I know many Foreign Service officers I deeply admire, but I think it needs a fundamental overhaul. So again, I wouldn't do it this way. I think if nothing else, just in human terms, we've got people all over Washington and elsewhere, and people all over the world who are suffering. This is not X or Twitter or a private corporation. This is the government. And we have an obligation to our public servants like we do others. But I want to suspend my judgment on the what, even as I protest on the how. And I want to see, and if I were in Congress or even in my current role, I want to see if there aren't people I can't make common cause with to get us to a very different place on the rule of law and on civility and on humanity, but still recognizing tremendous desire for change. So that was a longer answer and answered more questions than you asked, but I should say.
I love the trying to discern what is the objective and what are the means to get there, and trying to take a moment to reflect on that with some analytical ability, so that we're just not only in a situation of just reacting, but responding thoughtfully to things as they unfold. You were once a very influential advisor for a woman who almost became president. I'd like you to imagine advising the president today, and imagine that you both share the objective of the U.S. playing the role of peacemaker and unifier in the world. What would be your advice about what to prioritize?
So here again, here's an area where I think President Trump has a better chance of pulling off a Middle East deal than President Biden did. He's going to build on a lot of work that President Biden did, but I don't think he couldn't do it. He couldn't do it in part because the Israeli prime minister wasn't going to do it for him. He couldn't do it also because he didn't have the kind of clean slate that President Trump has. But I would tell President Trump, this should be your first move. And Netanyahu is in Washington today, and they are going to they're going to pull out all the stops. Again, I think for the president, it's more about, winning a Nobel Peace Prize and just making the deal of deals than it is sort of having thought through all the implications for the Palestinian people and for, I would say, Israeli security and for the Middle East. But I would say, look, you have a set of advantages here. The Netanyahu is never going to get a better deal than he will with you. And you need to push on that, and you need to push on the fact that it's time for him to turn from, I'm going to stay in office, to my legacy. That will probably involve amnesty, if I have to guess, domestically. But I would also say you have to work with the Saudis, and the Saudis are not going to agree to a deal unless there is actually a real path toward a Palestinian state, not a just kind of let's wave our hands and hope. And that looks like occupation of Gaza by an international force, by a regional force from other Arab countries. And that looks like longer term shifts in leadership, both in Gaza and in the West Bank. But that won't happen unless there's a path forward. So I would be pushing the president to do some of what he's doing. He wouldn't listen to me anyway about style. He's got his own way of doing things, and I know enough people who worked for him the last time round who told him all sorts of things and he didn't listen. But I would say, and this is again, for the sake of our interest, but even more for the sake certainly of the Palestinian people, and because I want to see a stable Middle East, and I want to see Israel secure, and I want to see Israel having relations with nations around the region, in a way, and they will not let that happen as long as Israel is occupying essentially, certainly the West Bank, and oppressing Gaza. So that's what I do. I'd push him to do that, and I think he is trying.
Does he have the people around him to ask the right questions, provide the right data, present the right alternatives?
So I don't know Mike Waltz, the National Security Advisor, but he was a New America Fellow for a while. So that tells me I know people. It was while I was there, but it was 10 years ago, and I didn't know him. My Vice President for Global Affairs, Peter Bergen, you've probably seen him on CNN, does know him and thinks he is certainly somebody you can do business with, and that he has, whether we probably don't agree on his assessment of some of these issues, but yes, I think that's actually true of Marco Rubio as well. I am less, and also his special advisor, the person whose name I'm now forgetting, whom he sent in to pull off the hostage deal. That person worked closely with the Biden people. So that's a positive statement. I certainly think there are folks around him who I wouldn't listen to, but I also think in the Middle East, there's enough overlap, again, on what the Biden folks wanted to do, and I think what he personally wants to do, that I'm encouraged. I'm much more worried on your area. Right? I'm much more worried on economic policy. I mean, there's not, I think the Secretary of the Treasury, was he confirmed? He must.
Yes,
I guess he was here. I think he does, but he's not making trade policy. And so I'm much more worried there. So I think, yes, I don't think he has as good people around him as he did the first time. I knew many of those people. But part of the problem was those people were there to stop him from doing what he wanted to do. And he realized that.
So you mentioned a former New America person working for the president. Tell us about the New America, it used to be called the New America Foundation. It no longer is. Now it's just New America.
It is. It is. We changed the name right after I became CEO in 2013 because Ian heard this, but I had lots of new friends. The minute people think you're running a foundation, it's just amazing who wants to get in touch with you. So I had to basically say, no, we are not a foundation. We are a nonprofit, and we raise our budget every year. We are kind of mid-size. We have a budget of about 45 million a year. We have about 200 people. 90 of those people are in the DC metro area. Everybody else is scattered around the country. And we have people, I mean, we have a sort of tiny office in Chicago, a lot of work in California, and then we have a network of, we have a lot of local work across the country. So we call ourselves a think and action tank, which is trite, and I really don't like it. I like it better than a think do tank, but I've tried all sorts of different things, but what we are is an organization that is focused on meeting the really big challenges that the new America faces. So what is the new America? Well, by 2027, most of your generation, Americans under 30, I see a few people who might be over 30, but I see a lot who are under, there will be no European American majority. And I use the word European American not because I'm being politically correct, but because white includes North African on the census. And that is not the experience of many North Africans I know. They would not say that they are white in the sense that that they are treated as white in this country. And I think the category is pretty meaningless in many ways. But European American, really important. For the first 250 years of our history, we've been 80% European American, now 75% if you look at the whole population. For the next 250 years, that will be 49%. And you'll have roughly 35%, it's hard to predict exactly, Hispanic American, and that's a huge category. And 13 to 15% African American, and again, these are what we project now. We have no idea and a growing number of Asian Americans, and again, that's an enormous category. That is such a huge change. And European countries are only encountering 10% population change, and they are really stressed. So that's the new America. I'm very excited about that, a new America, but it's a big change. Technologically, the next, not 250, let's just work between now and 2050. We will see as many changes as we saw between 1830 and 1870 in the Industrial Revolution, or between 1830 probably in 1920, where you get the internal combustion engine added onto electricity, if you think about the full industrial. So radically different. And then critically, what's our role in the world? Right? Yes, we have adversaries, and we are, we're still debating isolationism versus internationalism, and that's a big issue right now with this administration. But we are facing climate change and pandemics, and, you're reading about bird flu yesterday, and food security and water security, and a whole set of global issues, planetary issues. What is the role America's going to play? New America looks at the big changes we need to make in our political system. I want us to get as close to proportional representation as we can, because this system is not working for us. We've got two parties, and together, they don't represent a huge number of Americans. I want to overhaul our education system, K all the way. I don't want to overhaul the University of Virginia, but the University of Virginia and many of the schools I've been to, that is not the American higher education system. That's a tiny elite slice. I'm talking community colleges and many, many, many other colleges. And then putting family first at the center of our economic and social policy. Technology that serves democracy. A sense of America's role in the world for global problems, not just geopolitical. So those are all this big thing. And then we do a lot of work on the ground with youth apprenticeships, with government is not working in many ways. So we bring in technology and we try to figure out how to make it work. We are working with as many of the people who we're trying to serve to learn what it looks like from their perspective, as we are sitting in offices reading and working with people and coming up with solutions. So we're trying to build something new that is focused on these big challenges, but that is not thinkers in a tank.
You mentioned a lot of very big
I did.
issues there. family policy, higher ed, foreign affairs. Let's just talk about higher ed very quickly. What are some of the changes you recommend? You mentioned community colleges without getting into specifics there. You've also written about the college completion crisis and how many people start and don't finish college. What are your priorities in the higher ed space?
So the first one, from these are my higher ed folks, with education, birth through workforce is our biggest program. So we have like 45 people out of our 200 and 150 on programs. The first thing I would do is change the law that says universities don't have to, or in fact are blocked from issuing data on the employment statistics of their graduates, right? You have countless, hundreds of thousands of Americans who are borrowing a lot of money to get a college degree, who are often not finishing, and then they have the debt and no degree, which is like the worst of all worlds. There are many who do graduate, but discover they are either unemployed or, equally importantly, underemployed. They are not getting jobs that they were educated to do. Now, again, for the top slice of universities, we believe in liberal arts, and we believe in that we can educate all of you, and with a general education, and if you want to specialize, you'll do that in graduate school and you'll do fine. But for the vast majority of Americans who are in higher education, they ought to be able to compare the product just like they compare the product of anything else. And so should their parents be. So I would open up the American colleges and universities to competition in a very different way. I would also follow the lead of places like Arizona State University, which says they are judged by the number of students they include rather than the number of students they exclude. Far too many public universities essentially try to follow private universities and get themselves ranked as high as they can by how many people they exclude. And we need to be thinking, no, how can we educate as many people as we can for the jobs of the future and help them get those jobs, and then make sure that's affordable? And there's a whole raft of ways to do that, but I do think it starts with overhauling the idea, not that I'm opposed to liberal arts, I'm not at all, and I don't think it should just be reserved for the top slice of students. I think that's crazy. I want community colleges teaching liberal arts in many ways, but I do think what we've got, like in so much else of America, is the top slice is the best of the world, just like healthcare. And the big middle, and certainly the bottom, is in crisis.
Well, we have some ed scholars here and certainly people interested in education policy, so you may get some questions about that. And I will turn for questions in a bit, but I have a few more things I want to cover. You also used the phrase "put family first." And one of the things you're most well known for, at least in Washington circles and perhaps more broadly around the world, is an article you wrote back in 2012 when you were still, I think, or soon after you left the State Department, where you'd been a very respected, very successful leader, had many opportunities for further things in U.S. foreign policy, but you decided to leave. And then you wrote this piece called "Why Women Still Can't Have It All," a very personal piece that caused quite a stir and became an early viral sensation before social media was quite as viral as it is today. Tell us about that piece.
So I refer to it as a tsunami because that's how I experienced it. I wrote the article because I'd gone into the State Department in a dream job. I'd always wanted to be in the State Department, and I ended up as an academic and sort of worked my way around, but this was the job I thought I wanted when I graduated from college. I wanted to be high, I was going to go to law school and go in and out of the State Department. And I had the dream job, and I'm very proud of a lot of what I did in it. But, my oldest son was having a rocky adolescence, not the worst adolescence by any means, but he was making really bad choices. And, at 5, when you make bad choices, it's one thing. At 15, when you make bad choices, it's another. And you can really hamper your life chances. So I really felt, at that point, I didn't even feel like it was a choice. I had to go home. But in realizing all that, I had to revisit my own assumptions about work and family. And I realized that I had basically assumed it was It was a function of how ambitious you were as a woman and how well you managed your time. And I have 3 shelves of time management books, like many other women I know and many men. When you start buying the same one, you realize that maybe it's not working. Uh, and that it was up to us, that it was in our control. And when life happened to me, as it had happened to many women I knew, a divorce, a child with special needs, a husband who had to move, and suddenly your support system isn't there. I mean, millions of reasons, not millions, but many reasons. And it wasn't about their ambition, because I was plenty ambitious. It was that our systems are not set up for people who are caregivers and who also have career. So what I say is, and that was just the beginning of the journey. I wrote this piece. Many women of my generation felt I was letting down the side. I was betraying the movement. And I understood why they felt that way, because I would have said that, 5 years earlier. But at this point, I was looking at younger women going, this isn't working. We're 50-50 coming out of school, but we are still barely 20% in leadership positions, and in corporate, not even that. So something else has to change. Today, I would say that was the beginning. I'm still a career feminist. I encourage women and men to try to pursue the careers they want. But I am also now a care feminist, and I believe that we will not achieve gender equality for women and frankly for men, because there are a lot of men who actually want a different role in their families' lives, and we're very constrained by the gender roles that they are assigned. But until we value care as much as career, until we say that the reason I'm here this weekend with a 90-year-old mother and a 93-year-old father, offering care, supporting with my family, that work and the work that my husband and I did when our kids were, toddlers and teenagers, and as you and I were talking about, in their 20s, because it doesn't end, that work is just as important as the work I've done as a scholar or a leader or a writer. Because without that work, if my mother hadn't done that work and my father, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be able to do any of what I do. That work is weaving together the connection that keeps us healthy and whole. And that, when I talk about putting family at the center of our economic and social policy, of course I want individuals to be able to pursue the jobs they want and to have good jobs. But I want to say the work we do that is unpaid or poorly paid, or that work of care, is every bit as important, and healthy societies have to recognize that.
And is New America, but people could pause. Is New America coming up with policy solutions, trying out, working with states perhaps, or certain corporations to push certain family policies?
Absolutely. So in some ways, we do the standard stuff. We push paid family leave, right? I mean, again, you go around the world, we and Papua New Guinea are the only 2 states in the entire world that don't have maternity leave, paid maternity leave. In our cohort, in the OECD, we're one of a handful of countries that don't have paid family leave. So paternity leave, or however you define parents. And frankly, again, it's beyond parents. It needs to be paid family leave. When you need to take care of your family, you need to have your job protected and you need to have paid leave. And at some point, if it's too long, then you can make other arrangements. But often it's a crisis, and you need to be able to be there. We push for what Biden called an infrastructure of care. So good child care, good elder care, good care for the disabled, a whole structure where it can be family care, and you can then have either vouchers or at the very least, Social Security and recognition of how important that work is. So it doesn't have to be all state provided, and many of us think that's not the way the U.S. is going to go. The French have a beautiful system of creches for young children. The French are a very statist society, and we are less so. But we can build our own infrastructure of care. So we are working on that. But even more importantly, I'll give you an idea that it should be obvious, but it isn't. When I turned 65 2 years ago, I suddenly was eligible for all sorts of things. I get cheap everything. I get discounts on the New York subway. It's great, and why is that? Because people recognize that older people, I'm not, of course, an old person, I just happen to be 65, but 66, but because they were really poor, right? They didn't work anymore and they didn't have, so now we get Social Security, Medicare, and lots of supports. Let's look at families with children under 5. Those families have expenses that went way up and frequently an income that goes down because somebody's caring for those children. So you're either paying for childcare, which as you know is as much as the cost of rent in most states, or one of you is staying home. And so now you're on one income or 1.5 incomes. Why aren't we supporting families with children under 5 in the same way that we support older people who are no longer working? There is no reason that we shouldn't. It would be, talk about national security, a way to strengthen our people. That should not be hard. And that's the kind of thinking we're trying to do that says, if you really believe in care and you believe in career and you believe everybody should have those options, we need to support the people that have those obligations.
Fantastic. One more question, then I'm going to turn to the audience. New America's the new America is a place with very different demographic makeup than ours today. And you've spent a lot of time thinking about the value of diversity in the workplace, in education, and also in diplomacy. Sure. And you've written about the politics of solidarity in contrast to a politics of populism. Tell us what you mean by that.
So this is where I was going with my question about how I'm reacting to what's happening in the last 2 weeks. I understand the frustration, at least in this country. I spend a lot of time in Europe and I study it, but I understand the frustration that says things are broken. I think our healthcare system is just completely broken. Again, not at the very top, but, go to an emergency room with your 93-year-old father and wait there for 6 hours and then not really get treated. I mean, it's extraordinarily expensive and it's not working. I understand why so many students feel the education system is broken. I think our political system is broken. So I understand a lot of what gives rise to populism, a sense that the system is working for the elite, but it's not working for me. I understand a lot of people who say, I don't like the president, but I want a battering ram. I want to just smash things. And the politics of populism does that by othering. Like, it's their fault, it's their fault, it's their fault. And particularly here along racial lines, along gender lines, along geographic lines, the politics of solidarity says, yeah, actually, we are getting increasingly unequal. The system is not working for the majority of the people. But the way we address that is through feeling of coming together. Not everybody, I'm not talking about a world of harmony. I am talking about a world of disagreement that is more respectful and more curious and less assuming automatically that the person on the other side is either an idiot or evil, which is often the way our public discourse is, but that says, we can actually pull together. And again, we're the United States. We're not going to be Denmark. We're not going to be a lot of the countries that I look at. But there is a tradition of solidarity. It's not written into our, the Declaration of Independence. The French Revolution is liberty, equality, fraternity, which I would amend as solidarity. That's not in the U.S. tradition, and yet the African American community, any of our communities who are immigrant or poor or pulled together, how else did they make it? If you can look at white Americans going across the country in wagon trains, and even there, they only made it because they circled those wagons and, pulled together. The other big movement was south to north, and it was the Underground Railroad, and that is the politics of solidarity. So I want us to find a way to recognize what's wrong and galvanize the energy of change, but reject the politics of hatred and division and othering, and find at least respectful ways, but equally importantly, productive ways.
Thank you. We'd love to invite some questions from the audience. And if you don't have enough, I have plenty more, but do want to give students or other visitors or faculty a chance to ask any questions. So raise your hand if you have a question, and Sean will bring a mic around to you.
Thank you for being here today. I'm wondering how you see the politics of solidarity and ruthless capitalism working together, because we are always going to be capitalists and they don't seem to be hand in hand.
Yep. So did you all hear the question in the back? Yeah, okay, just want to make sure. So I do believe that we will be capitalist in the sense that we're going to be a market economy, not necessarily a free market economy. I think that our system of capitalism is based on half human beings, because it is based on the side of us that is a separated individual who achieves their interests. That's what the market is about. And that is half of us. And as a feminist, I have spent much of my life saying, growing up in Charlottesville, and believe me, it was no place for a smart girl when I was in high school. I went north to school. Princeton wasn't that north to school. I get that, as my northern friends, including my husband, like to remind me, but it was more north. Fighting against being defined as a mother or a daughter or a wife as a sister. I wanted to be a lawyer, a leader, all those things. That's half of who I am, and half of all of us, if we have choice. But the other half is this connected half. The other half is the person who needs those relationships, who will die without those relationships, either as a baby or, as we know, there's an epidemic of loneliness and isolation in this country. Your lifespan will be drastically shortened if you are not connected to others. So I see whole human beings. This whole idea of economic man, which is what you learn in economics, you know, that self-interested, achieving individual. Ian has spent much more time on the economic side than I have. That's fine, but it's only half human beings. So if we looked at whole human beings and what they need, and one might say if women who were the more connected half, but not the only, as I said, if we had been designing our capitalist system, believe you me, we would have been thinking about who's going to take care of people from the beginning, because that had been our traditional work. So let's rethink our capitalist system in terms of what you need, both in terms of having a job, like the unemployment rate's important. Yes, growth, but only growth that supports families, as far as I'm concerned. And a family is chosen or biological. When I say family, I mean groups of people who support one another. What does that capitalist system look like? I don't know the answer, but I think those are the right questions. And I think if we ask them, and there's the Well-Being Economy Alliance. There are a lot of cities and groups that are actually trying to see how do you harness capitalism to a wider concept of well-being and planetary sustainability. Definitely part of well-being, and we won't survive without that. That doesn't mean ripping up the system completely, but it means some really big changes.
Great. Thank you, Jen, for the question. Additional questions?
Hi, my name's Claudia. Thank you so much for being here today. So this is kind of like a joint question between the two of us. We collabed on this.
I was talking about connection. I'm all for it.
Exactly, yeah. So do you think you would have faced less backlash in proposing intentionally putting care into politics and policy if you hadn't been a woman?
No, and I'll explain why. Because in my experience, The men who put these ideas forward, and I know quite a number of men, are not only told that they're wimps and that this is not the role of public policy, as I am told, they are actually emasculated. In other words, if I talk about care, this is one reason I got such pushback from my peers, which was, oh, and I was very much this way for a long time. Like when I was a law professor, I was not going to teach family law. I was going to teach national security law. I was going to be a guy because that was where you got the respect. So the last thing you wanted to do was to play into a female stereotype. So now, though, if I do that, many more conservative women really like what I have to say because they see me as validating more traditional female roles. Men who do that really are still up against this idea that, you know, the tough guy does not go home to take care of his kids at 5 o'clock. The tough guy is still out there, you know, drinking late or going out for a golf. So we actually have to make it as safe for men to talk about care as we are still making it safe for women to talk about war and peace and capitalism. And you're already, you know, that battle is not won. The Secretary of Defense wants to roll that back. So I think in many ways it takes more courage for men to do this than it does for me.
Fantastic. Questions? Gerard, right up front.
Thank you for your service and the conversation. So when you mentioned Africa and China, a couple of things come to mind. So last September, I was at a conference where we talked about the future of Africa for education. And we still, as Americans, talk about Africa like it's a country, not a continent. And so when you think about the fact that 1 in 4 children, school age, in the next 70 years will be on the continent, we're one of the fastest higher education populations in the country on the continent. And Nigeria will at one point surpass America in terms of population. How do we reimagine Africa in an American foreign policy landscape that's not a handout philosophy, but investment philosophy? Because China's definitely doing the latter. That's
such a great question. And yes, 64 countries, right? Africa. So the first thing I'll say is I heard, I don't know, 5 years ago, somebody from the continent say, you know, when an American sees the picture of an African child without shoes, they want to donate their shoes. When a Chinese person sees that picture, they think there's a market for shoes, right? That encapsulates exactly the difference. So I see Africa as the world's future, more than certainly Europe or the United States, just demographically. I see tremendous dynamism. I mean, just extraordinary. You know, the news, what you see in the news is so often the crises. You do not see the tech sector in Nairobi, or Ghana for that instance, or, you know, Nigeria. I've been to Lagos a couple of times. It's a mess in lots of ways, and it's incredibly dynamic in others. So and in terms of education, you know, there's the African Leadership Academy that's actually essentially teaching Africans to teach Africans. So what I would do if I were in charge of U.S. foreign policy, the first thing I would do, and Biden started down this road, but not enough, is to say the transatlantic relationship is the whole Atlantic. It's north-south, it's north-north, of course. That's what most Americans mean when they talk about the transatlantic relationship, at least European Americans. I would then say it is south-south, Latin America to Africa. It is America to Africa. Some of the biggest opportunities this country has is precisely through the new African diaspora, not the African Americans who were brought here, but the Africans who are now African Americans. You know, you look at the Ethiopian community in Washington. There are extraordinary communities, and we should be building on those ties: trade ties, education ties, cultural ties, but also Latin America to Europe. If you thought constantly focused on China, let's not think about the U.S. and China. Let's think about the Atlantic Hemisphere versus the Pacific Hemisphere, and let's tap into all the resources and investment and what we can learn, particularly in the world of tech. That strikes me as a much happier frame for our future. And we will compete better with China, but we should not be in Africa only because we're competing with China. We should be in Africa because Africa is a huge part of the future.
Thank you.
So we have one back, then you, and then go ahead, Jerry.
I had a quick question about soft power. We have a class on NGO leadership here that has attracted, as we did in 2017, a number of students who are interested in public service without the US government seal of approval. It strikes me that a number of the soft power tools that secretaries of defense traditionally testify in support of, I think of General Mattis, I'll need more guns if we have less foreign aid. How would you counsel students who are interested in going into the international development space or working for NGOs under contract from the US government, given the extremely dire circumstances that a number of our friends are in today internationally, who literally can't buy an airplane ticket home because there's suspension on the mission they've been sent on by the American taxpayers?
Yep. Yes, and I'm on the board of a company that does a lot of that work. That it's for profit, but it's mission based, and we're looking at all of this. So for the moment, we are. I was thinking about the U.S. Agency for International Development is going to have to become the U.S. Association for International Development. We're going to have to look at our cities, our states, our mayors and governors, our foundations, our corporations, and those NGOs that are not dependent, at least on federal government aid, and that is most of it. We are going to have to find ways to effectively continue the foreign policy that many of us think we need without federal government or with dramatically reduced federal government support. And we have been here before, but not this dramatically. So I would urge my students, look, there are very powerful NGOs. I mean, if you look at the big 8 on any humanitarian disaster, they're as important as the federal government has been. But I would also say we have got to build a constituency for, let's stop calling it foreign aid. We've got to find a better way to talk about it. Across the country, much more locally. Your average American thinks that we're spending 15% of the federal budget in handouts to the rest of the world. As we know, it's a tiny percentage. We're not at 0.07%. So a lot of what I've been thinking about this also just domestically, we've got to go back local. We've got to look at churches, I think, working through our religious, our faith institutions. Those institutions can help build that constituency again. But if we're going to, over the long term, have the combination of non-governmental actors and governmental actors, because I do think we need both. You can never replace governments with the non-governmental actors, but you also have to have the non-governmental actors. Then I think we've really, the reason this can happen is because the State Department's not allowed to do domestic work. We're not allowed to lobby, nor USAID. We're going to have to find a way to build that consensus of Americans as generous people, but also Americans, back to your question, who are acting in our global self-interest by connecting to the countries around the world that Americans come from. And there again, that's the new America. We come from all these countries. This is not a handout to foreigners. These are, just as we were in Europe after World War II, they were our people because that's where we came from. We got to do that. There was somebody on the aisle there, I think.
Thank you for speaking with us. I've noticed this rising trend in anti-expert knowledge and people don't like to trust experts, especially during the pandemic. And I was wondering if you've noticed that trend, and as a CEO of a think tank, how do you think think tanks and researchers should navigate this changing landscape?
Yeah. Yeah, and part of a lot of this I do think goes to the pandemic, and the experts didn't get it all wrong on the pandemic, far from it, but we got a lot wrong. And we made decisions based on incomplete information that forced people to, choose between their jobs and a vaccine, or told people that they had to do this or that. We didn't know what we were doing some of the time. We were doing the best we could. I'm talking about experts. But I think the failure to recognize, to be open about what we didn't know hurt us. The President Trump's whole point was the experts say I can never win. And that seeded an awful lot of the distrust of the mainstream media. So there are lots of places I think you can look where you can say, we experts need to be more transparent, more forthcoming about the limits of our expertise. The other thing I think, and we do this in New America, that's what I meant about a think tank. Think of the imagery of a think tank, a bunch of smart people in a tank in Washington making recommendations that affect people's lives across the country. And frankly, right now, in the old days, you write a report. If anybody reads it, you're lucky. Then if you can convince somebody to act on it in Congress or the executive, that can take 5 years. It can be another 5 years before it's implemented. And then guess what? It doesn't work the way you thought in your tank it should work. So we believe in human-centered design. We believe you start with a group of parents who need childcare, just to give you one, or need paid family leave. We did this in New Jersey because New Jersey had paid family leave, but only 40% of New Jerseyans took it up. Well, why was that? Well, we started with a group of parents who could have gotten paid family leave but didn't. Well, there are two programs, and it's very hard to figure out which one you're eligible for. Your employer really doesn't want to tell you about it because they don't want you to leave. It was super complicated, and most people who did find out about it, it was almost too late because you got to know before you have that baby or adopted that baby or whatever else. But here's my favorite. If you have a 2-letter last name, the New Jersey form won't take it. So if you are a Lee or a Wu or any other 2-letter name, and there are many, too bad. New Jersey was planned for Joneses and Smiths. So that's the kind of thing when you think people don't trust expertise. Yeah, I get it. But the solution is not to say we shouldn't have people thinking about policy, and we shouldn't have people who, are really educated to make good choices. It is that the people who are affected by those choices have to be part of that process. And then it has to be an iterative process, because you're going to try something and then it's not going to work. You got to go back to those people. And that's what a software developer does. They don't just, release the software and say good luck. They are constantly talking to the users, and government needs to think about the users.
Great. Probably time for one last question, and I'm going to ask it. So at New America, you have about 200 staff. You said you probably hire a couple dozen a year. What are the skills, and let's talk to some of the more junior people perhaps, but you can cover more broadly. What are the skills they bring that inspire you the most and reasons you go hire them? And what are the skills that you may find that your new staff is lacking, that you wish they'd perhaps picked up in a policy school or somewhere along in their educational journey?
Well, the biggest thing they're lacking is knowing that they should email the CEO on a regular basis to tell her what a great job she's doing. And I'm joking, but what I'm not joking, and this is, you don't necessarily teach it, but it is true for all leaders. You hear constantly when things aren't going well, right? That's no problem. Then everybody goes, oh, we need to punt this up to whatever. You rarely get the email that just says, that was a great message that you sent out. It really made me feel better. So just for any boss, and I don't mean sycophantic, like, oh, that was fabulous. I just mean occasionally remembering that the people, yes, they're paid the big bucks, but they need, they're humans too. But on the thing that impresses me, and it goes to this last question, we have a bunch of education people who did Teach for America or some other teaching before they got into ed policy. And we have people in our tech policy who worked in tech in some way and then decided, I really need to do this at scale. Or we work a lot on housing, and we advocate for a national housing loss rate. So we have a national unemployment rate. Imagine if everybody knew in every state how many houses are being lost, and they are lost from obviously evictions, but foreclosures and disasters. You'd be accountable on that. But we have people who worked in trying to get people housed. So I'm very impressed, and it's more so than my generation. And really, my generation went more likely straight from undergraduate to graduate. And now I think your generation thinks, yeah, let me get out there. Let me see what other options there are. Let me come to graduate school, or even as undergrads, as I think about it in the summer, not at that one remove, but actually working with the folks I'm trying to help. So I've been very impressed with that. The things that I still need, we really do still need great writing. And yeah, okay, Chat GPT is going to take care of the, of the grammatical mistakes, but it's a little like Muzak as compared to real music, right? It's been kind of dumbed down in various ways, but also it's just bland. And really good writing is not bland. It's vivid and it's concise, and you cut all those extra words out. So that's a kind of constant, but in some ways I think it's even more important. The other thing that I think that I'm missing, and I think you teach it by encouraging students. I'm all for working from home some of the time, but for people, and I live in Princeton, and I'm only in the office 2 days a week, and that's when I'm not traveling elsewhere. But for all of you who are on your first, second, or third job, being with other people and really being with them and figuring out, how to work with them face to face. This goes back to connection and what human beings need. And we know that the neuroscience of engaging through screens is not the same as when I look at you or you in the round. Different parts of my brain are firing. And so I'm really concerned that we're going to have a whole generation who's never told or taught or experienced through their education. You got to do both. We really do still need to come together.
So many more things I'd love to pick your brain about, but we are out of time.
It was great.
Please join me in thanking Anne Marie Slaughter.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Great questions. Well, you and I have really gotten to work at it. I think we should take the show on.